I'm Steven from the Hills Maniacs, and today I'm going to be continuing my series of reviews on all of the live-action Spider-Man movies. Over the past few weeks, I've reviewed the original Sam Raimi trilogy of Spider-Man movies. Now, in today's video, I'm starting with the Amazing Spider-Man, so let's get into it. Now, before I get started with the video, I do just want to say I hope everyone had a safe and happy Thanksgiving with your families and enjoyed getting stuffed with lots of food. I know I did. But let's get into the video. So, first of all, the thing I liked the most about this Spider-Man movie in particular was that it tried to take a different route than what we were used to seeing. Even the MCU Spider-Man didn't really have this kind of mystery to it because they added a mystery into this movie where we immediately are shown that Peter's parents kind of just disappear one day. And that's why he ends up living with his uncle and aunt. When he's still just a young boy, his father and mother kind of run away somewhere, and we don't know where they are. We do find out later in the movie that his father worked for Ozcorp, and I guess we don't really find out until the second movie that why exactly, or the answer to that mystery. But we do get kind of a look into his life before he had to live with his uncle and aunt, and we haven't seen that in any other Spider-Man movie because it all immediately comes in. Even the original, the Tobey Maguire trilogy. He's just kind of with his aunt and uncle, and then his uncle Ben dies, But we kind of get a little bit of a backstory to that in this one, and that's what I kind of liked the most about this. And they did a nice job of tying everything that happened to Peter to Ozcorp, which, as you know, if you watch, the original Spider-Man movies, Ozcorp was a big deal because his friend's father works there, Norman Osborn eventually becomes the Green Goblin from working at Ozcorp, so he kind of Ozcorp has always been in the comics, even tied to Spider-Man. I thought it was unique, how they tied everything to Ozcorp, because that's the whole reason that Peter gets bitten by a spider too. Is he goes to Ozcorp after finding out that a coworker of his dad's named Dr. Curtis Connors, which is a bigger deal than we're led to believe originally if you don't know the comics and the character from the comics. But I'll get into that in a little bit. He goes there to meet Dr. Connors to see if he knows what happened to his dad. And then he ends up in Ozcorp, ends up sneaking into a lab in Ozcorp that has all these spiders in it, and actually ends up getting bitten by one, which is how he gets his powers. So I like that they connected that not only to the mystery of his parents and his past and everything else, but also how he gets bitten by a spider. And it all ties into Dr. Connor's research on cross-species genetics, which is where he's trying to see what kind of animal DNA could be used to cure humans, kind of. So if we have diseases, what kind of animal blood or DNA could cure these and things like that. That's the kind of stuff him and Peter's father and everyone at Ozcorp are working on. And we do find out that the reason they're working on that is because Norman Osborn in this universe is sick and needs a cure for whatever disease that he has, and we find out more about that in the second Amazing Spider-Man movie, which I'll get into in the next video that you see as part of this series. But I like how everything was connected in a way that we're not used to. If you see the original trilogy of Spider-Man, really his only connection to Oscorp is through Harry. His best friend Harry Osborn is the son of Norman Osborn, who owns Oscorp. Then Harry kind of takes over Oscorp, and it's just kind of he runs Oscorp. I mean, I guess that leads to Otto Octavius as well, but it's not really connected to him as much in the original Sam Raimi trilogy as much as it is in this series. And I even like the way that they made the Spider-Man suit look in this movie. I thought it was really cool looking, and maybe even cooler than some of the ones from the MCU Spider-Man and even the original Spider-Man costume. I feel like it had a cooler design. Maybe the only other cool designs I've seen of Spider-Man costumes was from the Spider-Man video games on the PS4. There were a lot of really cool ones on that. But this one I thought was cooler and maybe even more of an upgrade to the one from the Sam Raimi trilogy. And also I like that Peter Parker in this universe is more of a science geek than even Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker, because while Peter Parker in in that trilogy is interested in science and is a nerd, he's not like building things, in his bedroom like we see Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker doing in this movie. And even in this one, it's more comic accurate, I guess, because he actually builds the webbing, which happens in the comics. I've heard that in the Sam Raimi trilogy, when he had like the natural webbing as part of his DNA, that was put together only for that movie. Like that had never been seen. Any version of Spider-Man in the comics had always built their own webbing and the web slingers and all that other stuff, the technology that goes with the suit. So that had never been done before. But this, I like that they kind of showed how geeky he really is and how much into science he is. And they even tied that into the plot as well, where he helps Dr. Connors figure out the one algorithm that was keeping him from creating the serum he needed to properly execute the things he was trying to do with the cross-species genetics, which leads to of course him becoming the lizard later on in the movie because he tries it on himself. So I like that connected as well, where like Peter accidentally, inadvertently creates the villain in this movie, whereas in the other ones he didn't really, other than Harry, I guess he technically created Harry as a villain because he made him mad at him for killing his father, if you saw those movies. But he actually, in this one, helps create the villain. We don't even see that in the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. He didn't really create the villain. That was more Tony Stark created or was the cause for them becoming villains. So I like that they did it this way because it made it feel like there's more at stake here. It wasn't just Peter is trying to stop these people because he feels he has to. It was he actually has a reason to want to take down the lizard because he helped create the lizard inadvertently by helping Dr. Connors with this. And speaking of the lizard, I think that what the lizard does in this movie honestly makes him probably the most threatening Spider-Man villain I think I've ever seen, like, in live action movies, because like he is the only villain that actually does something that could affect like the whole city of New York. Like the Green Goblin in the first Spider-Man, in the original Spider-Man movie, just kind of like only goes after Peter really and kills a couple people and tries to kill people to get Peter to come to him, but that's pretty much all he does. And he kind of also goes out for revenge against the people that fired him from Ozcorp. But other than that, it didn't really do anything to like where it could affect the entire city of New York. I guess maybe the one that could have affected everyone the most was like Doc Ock, but this one he actually did like have a plan that would truly work, and we actually did see it work a little bit. Like he wanted to turn everyone in the city, maybe even the world if it would have reached far enough, into lizards, because after he becomes the lizard, he goes crazy and starts to realize that humans are weak and we need to adapt as a species and become better. So he wants to turn everyone else into lizards just like him. So he creates this serum that will do that, and he has to take it to the top of Oscorp Tower because they have the technology to do that. So again, it ties back to Oscorp. And we do actually kind of see this go into effect a little bit when he's attacked by some cops and he unleashes it on them and they actually start turning into little lizards. Now we didn't see much with that. Like I don't know if we never really see them like attacking anybody, and things like that. But like I think that was the most intriguing like villain we've seen so far and the most threatening, honestly, in any Spider-Man villain thus far, even after having watched the MCU Spider-Man. Like those were all kind of just, they were trying to do things to get back at Peter, or to get back at Tony Stark and all that stuff. They had that whole plot going. But this was more, he was doing it for a supposedly good, or at least in his mind it was a good reason. And then Peter has to stop that because, like I said, he caused this. It did a really nice job of showing the tension of the whole situation and why Peter actually does have to stop the lizard because he helped create it and he's responsible for all this in a way. The only thing that maybe I didn't like necessarily about this movie was that Peter kind of reveals right away to Gwen Stacy that he's Spider-Man. Like he meets Gwen Stacy in this movie, they kind of eventually start dating and everything else, and then at one point in the movie he reveals that he is Spider-Man. I didn't like that necessarily because I feel like there's more to it. Like we got to see, like I said in the original trilogy, how it was more grounded because you feel that tension because he's trying to keep up his relationship with MJ, but he knows he can't because he's Spider-Man and there will be villains coming after him and he doesn't want her to get hurt. Where this one, Peter kind of doesn't care about that necessarily until the end of the movie when he's told from Gwen's father to who does also find out that he's Spider-Man but ends up dying. If you haven't seen the movie, or if you have seen the movie, you know that. He tells Peter, like, if you're gonna be Spider-Man, like, don't involve Gwen in any of this. He doesn't want Gwen to get hurt, so he kind of gives Peter an ultimatum, like, don't keep Gwen out of all of this, which he ends up doing. He kind of has to, like, break things off with her, and she realizes that, like, her father made him do it, which is okay, but, like, you don't really get that tension of, like, Peter has to go through all this struggle of trying to keep his secret while keeping his relationship with Gwen Stacy as well. So that was the only thing, and we don't really see that come into effect either until the second movie. All in all, though, I think this was a pretty decent movie. It definitely feels kind of like a remake. Like, there are a lot of similarities to the original if you really go back and think about it. Like, even like when Dr. Connors ends up turning into the Lizard, they mention a formula, which is kind of like what happens to Norman Osborn, why he ends up giving it to himself, because they're trying to take the formula away from him. So they kind of had that parallel as well. And he also turns into a green villain, which is also similar to that as well. But other than, if you look past all the similarities, I think this version of Spider-Man is actually maybe more unique than the original. I don't know if it's necessarily like better than the original, because they did have to take a lot of plot points from the original to sort of make this work. Like Uncle Ben's death still happens. Peter lands in a wrestling ring at one point. That's where he gets the idea for his suit and everything else. So it's kind of like they did parallel it to the original Spider-Man, because this was meant to be a new trilogy of Spider-Man movies, but they only made 2 because the second one flopped so badly. Other than that, I thought it was a pretty decent movie. I'd rate it like a 3 or 4 out of 5 if I were to give it a rating. But let me know what you guys thought of the movie down in the comment section if you've ever seen the Amazing Spider-Man movie. If you haven't seen it, I do suggest watching it. And maybe watching it side by side with the original Spider-Man. You can kind of pick out some of those similarities that I mentioned. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. In the next video, I will be talking about the Amazing Spider-Man 2, and then I'll be following that up with all of the Tom Holland MCU Spider-Man, starting with, Spider-Man Homecoming, and then Far From Home, and then No Way Home. Whenever that comes out in theaters, I'll be talking about that as well. And then following that, I'm going to be doing a comparison video somewhere, probably sometime next year, I think, near the beginning of the year or something. I'll compare every live-action Spider-Man movie, and I will include Into the Spider-Verse in that as well. So if you like those kind of videos as well, then keep an eye out for that when it does come out. Thank you for watching this video, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.
Subscribe.